Do. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I have GSL vs. the World replays. Thank you, people who gave those to me, aka Blizzard. Not allowed to cast these. I'm allowed to do some nice analyses though, and look at some beautiful things. Now, what we're going to be looking at here is a best of 5. We're going to go through it in chronological order, and we're going to just kind of talk about all of these beautiful little details as we get there. So, one beautiful little thing this is going to allow us to do. Whoops. Hotkeys? Oh, I can't do that. Whatever, it doesn't matter. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk through stat style. So Stats managed to dismantle Maru 3-1 in this set. He used Colossi timings that looked near identical in terms of the convergence point that they ended up hitting in every single game. He almost always ends up pushing with 3 Colossi, a couple of Sentries, ton of Stalkers, some Charge Lots, and maybe a few Archons mixed in for good measure. He basically kills Maru in 3 games with that timing. Oh my god, hype killer. Yeah, this is not about hyping up a series or anything. We're not casting the games or analyzing them. He basically just wrecked him with this very nice timing. Maru never had enough Vikings out, or it would get him just before range lib kicked in, and the libs would just get blinked underneath and sniped down. It was really clean play. So let's talk through it, and first of all, let's look at game number 1 in the series. This is Stats in the top left, and he's opened up with 2 Adepts, and he's gone back to an older style of opening, which is the Fast Robotics and the Twilight Council. So he's going for a Blink Robo. He does either this opening or a Fast Stargate into Triple Oracle. Both builds end up going Blink Stalkers, Sentries, and into Colossi, and often even double Robotics Colossi if it's a little bit of a later transition. Kind of depends. With this build, he usually doesn't need the second Robo, but it kind of depends where the game goes. So he goes Robo, goes Twilight, adds a second and third Gateway. Now, one thing you're going to notice is while Stats scouted and he harassed a little, he confirmed there was an expansion at the normal timing. The one thing which I feel he may have been underestimating a little was the threat of a 2 Cyclone, 2 Hellion pressure. And that's because that is just so out of the meta in Korea that I think he just assumed it wasn't going to come. Thoughts on that, Gemini, my man? Do you think it's just because he saw it was a barracks gas and not a gas first? He's like, nope, you're not going to do that? Because I feel like if there's one thing in this series that might have got him out, since he's pretty blind in the early game, like just a couple of Adepts and a Stalker, he'd be in big trouble versus that, right?
So you're talking about like those 2 Cyclone, 2 Hellion memes where they come in sometimes SCVs and stuff, right?
Yeah, like sometimes even a whole 4 SCVs on auto repair.
Yeah. He didn't do a rescout to check if there was a barracks or factory on the reactor, did he?
Nope, not at all. In none of the games. Not a single one.
Yeah, I feel like when I see that, I honestly feel like that's just Koreans being Koreans, and that they're very greedy and just kind of... I don't know why, but they don't scout sometimes when I feel like they should, and I feel like it's because they know that they're going to get denied the scout. Because a lot of Terrans, I don't know if Maru did it this game, but I think a lot of Terrans, they will like eventually people would do rescouts with probes and stuff, and then they would allow them it allowed them to see what the follow-up tech was, but then they started going Marine before the reactor, so then you can't ever get that, and so then it's just a wasted probe basically. Yeah. So I feel like Stats is just being kind of passive in that regard, like not doing that, and then he just doesn't feel safe leaving the Reaper with like free reign at his natural. I honestly don't know why they don't do the scout, at least with the Adept, because you have the second Adept at home to deal with the Reaper, and then you can send the other one across. I don't know. I feel like this is just Koreans being Koreans and being a bit greedy, and I agree that he probably could have gotten punished with it once or twice.
Absolutely, but I mean, that's one of the things, right? When you get to this level of play, there is a lot of assumption being made about what's good at the moment, what people are playing, what they consider bad. And so you come through the meta, and what you understand is there's like an experience where the Terrans have just said, look, the Cyclone Hellion build does not work anymore. So they're just not doing it. And that's why it's something Stats feels safe sort of corner cutting against it. Now, it's not just that. He completely denies Maru's scouting, right? If he leaves only 1 Adept at home, the Reaper can get in and see what he's scouting, what his tech is, like pretty much 100%. Like a Maru Reaper, I feel, is always going to find a way past a single Adept. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, that's the other half of it. We're keeping the second Adept back is basically a way to make it so that... Because, like, he's doing something not standard, right? Like, it's not often that Protosses go Robo first anymore in PvT. I mean, I do it all the time because I'm an AGM and, you know, not great, but pro players for the longest time, you can look back at how many ever VODs you want. Robo first has been out of the meta for a very long time, so he's trying to keep that as little or as much as that away from Maru's eyes as possible, pretty much.
Yeah, so that's it, right? Prioritizing information denial, especially with your own out of the meta sort of build, and saying to yourself, and the thing is, you can send the Adept across, as you mentioned, and that's something I do in all of my games, because I am obsessed with making sure I see if there's Cyclones, because I need that shield battery, and I need to start chrono boosting extra Stalkers, right? I need to be like, we need extra Stalkers to deal. That timing's brutal. If you've just got 2 Adepts and a Stalker, they're running with 2 Cyclones, a few SCVs, like, you actually just can't kill them. Like, you're like, cool, I'll kill 3 of the repairing SCVs, and all my units will be dead, and I won't even have damaged the other units. Like, you're dead. You're dead if that happens, right? So, it's definitely something, though, where Stats is well set up for a Widow Mine drop, which is in the meta. He's got the 2 Adepts and the Stalker in the main, the 3 Stalkers in the natural. A Liberator, a Widow Mine drop, a Cyclone drop, a Marine Mine drop. Any of those options are going to be well blocked. And, at the same time, he's going to get scouting with this Observer that's already gone in. He sees a very quick 3rd command center in this game, and he says, oh, okay, all right. And he's already following his normal plan, which is take a 3rd base, drop the gases immediately afterwards, because he should be oversaturated in his natural at that point. Gets a few more Stalkers out. He builds 3 Observers, obviously straight into Blink on the Twilight as well. So his Robo, Twilight, 2nd and 3rd gate, 3 Stalker warp in after the 2 Adepts and the Stalker. He then makes a 3rd Nexus, takes 2 gases, goes for, of course, in this case, the double Forge, and then the Robotics Bay. Now, if he saw he was up against a 2-1-1 or something else, he would do it differently. But as long as his opponent's playing a 3 command center build, a rather passive build, and in this case, Maru is playing the most passive build, where the only option is let's push out with a bunch of Stim Bio, and obviously Blink Stalkers are going to be able to threaten that really well. And kind of wear it down, which is why Maru has to stay home. He's just going to go double upgrades, straight up into Colossi attack. So a single Immortal after the 3 Observers, straight into Colossi, double upgrades, starts probing up that 3rd. So it's basically been a completely uninterrupted macro build where there has been almost no threat, very few trades in this game. And you can see Stats is not even like, hey, let's commit to the 8 Blink Stalkers to do some damage and slow you down. He says, you're not going to push across the map. Just get the Colossi, get the upgrades, have the non-stop probe production. Oh, and back on that earlier point, we were talking about the scouting. Stats doesn't like chrono boosting his 2nd gateway unit. He likes to put that into probes. So with his very economy-focused mindset, that's another thing. If you want to scout with your 1st Adept, you really need to chrono boost the 2nd Adept, or the Reaper's going to get, the Reaper's going to get in and kill a few probes. Stats is like, nah, I want an extra probe. I want an extra probe or 2 with that chrono boost. So he really focuses on that. After Blink, he goes straight into Charge. Let's fast forward from here. And he basically goes, okay, 3 more gateways at first. Then he adds another bunch of gateways to go up to a total of 8 gateways. Non-stop Colossi production until he has 3. Then adds a Warp Prism. This is like the most contained passive way of playing. And let's look at where Stats prioritizes his vision. Super defensive ring. Very, very defensive ring, because he knows Maru's the sort of player who's going to like pull back slightly, pick up, boost into his main base. So he's got a very defensive ring of Observer vision. And he's trying to keep his eyes out there as much as possible. Now, Force Fields. He adds 3 sentries in around the time the Colossi production starts up. Very important to have the ability to Guardian Shield and Force Field to help hang on. And he splits his army. He starts building a little bit of static, splits Stalkers into the main. And this is the point where his army is kind of nearing completion. He's going to have 2-2 upgrades. 3 Colossi, as I said, is the magic amount, which he always goes for. Gets the Warp Prism, which will allow him to reinforce the other side of the map. And he's actually pretty much ready to push himself. But Maru is like, I gotta do damage, shit, I gotta do damage. And one thing we're gonna notice in Maru's play is he is the king of YOLO. Stats came down and tried to cut him off there on the retreat. And he says, screw you, your army's out of position, let's jump on top. But Stats handles this beautifully. Now notice the Medivacs prioritize the Medivacs here. And even though the Stalkers start getting wrecked, as soon as the Zealots are gone, he blinks them back, and then he blinks the reinforcements forward, and only 2 Medivacs get out of there. Overall, this is an incredible trade for Stats. At the same time, Maru rallied a bunch of Marine Marauder Mine over here, runs in, but doesn't get the critical damage he was looking for. And that's kind of incredible. Why were 2 Colossi there? Was that completely reactive? Or did he actually realize? So he's coming back, At what point does he send those units over there? He sends a probe out front to see if there's more units coming in. Actually, no, it's to take a 4th base. No. I was like about to be like, what a wizard! He's just like, go check if there's another. No, he's going to take a 4th base. Because that's really what's the 4th. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be easier just to storm, and just like, or just like use the High Templar to feed back the medevacs as they're dropping?
Well, I mean, Storm is a completely different build, right? That's a completely different play style. So you can talk about like looking at a battle and you can say, wouldn't this fight be easier if you had X? But it's like, well, your opponent wouldn't be doing this into X, right? Maru is dropping to try and take advantage of the immobility of the Colossi and the fact that he thought he caught stats out of position. And there's no High Templar tech out. Like the Templar Archives finished what? Was it even started during that drop? Let's check.
No. He doesn't get Templars in, I don't think.
He does.
Oh,
he does. He goes for Archons. It's also for Ravens.
True.
He needs to be able to feed back a Raven, something we'll see in the final game of this series, because Raven can lock down the Colossi. But yeah, like the Templar Archives is like finishing as this fight is going down in the main base. So there was no time to like swap into feedback. Not just that. If they don't have enough energy, they're not going to actually die. So a lot of these medevacs will get knocked down to like 40, 60 life. But you're going to need 1 High Templar for each medevac. So you need enough gas for 6 High Templar. You do the feedbacks, morph into Archons. At this stage, you're much more focused on just get more Stalkers and Zealots and deal with it. And he shuts it down very effectively with that. If he wanted to play safer, he could have just not been moving so forward aggressively with that Colossi army. But he wanted to shut down Maru and not let Maru just dance around out front his base forever. And it worked out. He kind of towed the line just right. He started moving down. Maru thought there was a hole, but Stats got back there just in time. And he split these units off towards that counterattack on that side just in time as well. But in terms of High Templar as an overall tech choice, I mean, Artosis has been basically saying this for a while, and he's saying it a lot during this series. He's like, I've been saying it for ages. You need to go Colossi. You can't play Gateway. You can't do this against Maru. He's just going to micro against your Zealots and kite them back and kite them back. And it's like what Gemini was saying just before about EMPs are going to kind of come in, you know, very early and start dealing with them. He's going to be able to spread versus the Psystorm. The Colossi is this very reliable threat, and it forces the Terran. The Terran can't pick away at you. The Terran can kind of pick away against High Templar and Zealots a little bit with very good micro, which Maru, of course, excels at. But especially, especially with Colossi, you set up this force where suddenly Force Field is incredible. Force Field's not that useful with Gateway, High Templar. You add Colossi in, Force Field stop them jumping on you, you just keep picking away. You have the superior range, and it allows you to pick these fights. Notice the way Stats moves his army around, and he holds positions just outside of the lib zones. And if he thinks that he's got an opportunity and a timing, which he almost always does find in this series, he'll do this. He'll just blink forward, and this was a bit of a messy blink. He only actually got like 1 of those libs quickly, but he went in there before there were too many libs out. And he had Zealots, he had Archons in there as meat shields. His Warp Prism's ready to pick up and save Colossi as they get low. And he basically just kind of runs in and rolls over everything. At the same time, of course, he did defend the counterattack, so we can kind of go look at that, right? Or was that later in this game? I wasn't watching the minimap at all. Oh, it must be later. This game does go for another 2.5 minutes. Okay, cool. Whenever you lose the Zealots and Archons, this army is very fragile to Marauders, especially if you don't have force fields to hold your opponents back. So this is why Stats is very careful at this stage. He's very like, I don't want to push in here, man. I don't want to just like headbutt and die. Wait for some more units. Wait for a few more Archons, a few more Zealots, a few more Stalkers. And then he's like, yeah, screw you, you're dead, buddy. Jumps forward. Takes down the libs, and this is one of the scariest attacks to execute, especially if you're an inexperienced player. But he understood that he had the powerful tech units, he had a stronger army right now, and he knew he could take that fight. But you could just as easily back off, just take out this third base over there. By the way, he split a Zealot off, so that Zealot kills the entire mineral line pretty much. So he knew he could take it. Shoot. Was there a question?
No, I think someone just made a comment about the Zealot.
Oh, right. Sorry. Kind of gobbled.
Yeah.
Disco.
I just said Hero Zealot.
Hero Zealot? Yeah. It got drilled down eventually. Apparently, like 26 SCVs does beat a 2-2 Zealot. Even though each drill attack does like, what, 2 damage? Right? Yeah, 3 armor, 5 damage in attack. Yeah. Yeah, that 100 Zealot hit points lasts for a casual 50 SCV attacks. But that's it. Takes him down. This drop goes across the map. The Stalkers and Probes are able to deal with it. And even recalls his army home. Maru's like, hey, nah, I can't win this. Like, he just looks at this army and he's like, nope, this is sad. It's like, perfect spread, GG. So, it was just a brutal timing there. Really good defense, strong Colossus play. Denied scouting, so Maru didn't know what he was up against. Maru felt forced to try to make something happen with the drops there. He didn't have the information on what the tech choice was, and wasn't able to find anything. Do we have any questions going on? Anything interesting going on in chat, guys?
So, Colossi and Storm used to be a really big thing from, like, Heartless Swarm, Wings of Liberty, but from what I've seen anyway recently, it's mostly Storm and Archons and Charge Lots, and with this game, he went for a 3 Colossus timing and pushed a specific point. Would this still last into, like, an end-game composition, or is it something that Colossi don't last that long as a actual army?
That's actually a very good point. So basically, what if you do go longer? Is this like an all-in? Does he need to win here? No, but it's a very sharp timing, and you want to kind of win while your army is at its strongest, right? He senses weakness, he pushes in. Range libs come out, ghosts come out, things get more difficult, right? So one of the most powerful, there's always interesting power spikes in this matchup, right? So one power spike is when you first get a good amount of splash damage with a good amount of support for it. This point here, perfect example. When there's 1 Colossi, a Sentry, and a few Zealots, and 3 Stalkers, it looks kind of shitty. You suddenly get this army, and it's like, oh my god, 3 Colossi, 3 Sentries, a bunch of Stalkers and Zealots. You add another round or 2 of weapons. It's very powerful suddenly because you've got all the support. You've got the Stalkers to take out the anti-air, this sort of thing. And this continues with this army where you want it to keep going. You want more Stalkers to take down the Medivacs, take down the Libs, or the Vikings if they go for Vikings. You want more Zealots, more Archons. But Zealots and Archons don't perform that well once you get to, like, ultimate max armies. EMP, big bio forces, actually very good against Zealots in the later stages as well. Melee units in general fall off in these massive, massive fights. Archons, of course, getting EMP just makes them kind of worthless. But I think the biggest one is Stalkers. I think the biggest thing is what counters the splash damage of Protoss. Now, outside of the Ghost High Templar, you could argue even Liberators counter Ghosts, right? Especially with range. What counters the Liberators? The Stalkers, or at least it deals with them. I wouldn't say it, like, counters them. But Stalkers are a trash unit the longer the game goes. In any raw fight where it's Marauders and Marines, Bio Medevac up against Stalkers, the Stalkers don't perform, right? The Stalkers need to be in these sort of engagements where they're using their mobility to quickly jump in, snipe down the opponent's units. If Maru had range lib finished, this is something we're going to be looking at throughout this series, and had 5 Liberators sieged up here at maximum range with some Marauders spread underneath, there's no way Stats pushes through here. Stats is like, fuck, I better go add Storm. I better start the Tempest transition. You know, I better add all these other things and focus on getting up to that big 80 probe economy with shield batteries and cannons and High Templar everywhere, because you got to play to that stage. But Stats goes hunting for this timing because he says, well, these Stalkers I've made lose some value if that happens. These Zealots, these Archons I've made, they lose some value. I've got a power spike right now. If I can find a window before my opponent has what they need for this, and you usually can with this Colossi style, unless Maru beelines towards that, he's not going to be ready, and that's the story of this series. The Protoss hits the power spike, the Terran does not have the answer for it in time. Repeatedly in this series. And it's because he hides the information very well. He goes to the same timing attack off many, many different scenarios. And, you know, Maru's the best player in the world, right? Maybe Cyril, but definitely Maru is probably the more consistent at the moment, right? So we all look at Maru, and it's weird to see him die to essentially the same timing attack every game. This isn't like Wings of Liberty early days where Jelizerg loses to like 5 sentries force fielding his ramp from MC 6 times in a row in a finals, and we're like, well, that was dumb. No, it's a more complicated timing, it's executed incredibly well, but it is essentially the same Colossi attack, which in every single game in the series caught Maru unprepared. Is this because Maru didn't think Colossi was going to happen again? Did he need to rush up libs? Was he focusing too much on trying to get aggression with his drops? That's hard to say. What you can definitely say, though, is Stats, every time he had an advantage with this, he never wasted any time. As soon as he hit this power spike, he's always got this urgency to get over there in the Terran's face. And even if there's enough libs, what does he do? He uses his mobility, right? So in this example, imagine this choke point up here was defended better. He can rotate his army to the left, or at least 10 zealots, run them into this base, run zealots into the natural. This is something you'll see Protoss players do. They say, well, you still can't engage in my army. I can sit just outside of your lib zones. I can maybe go around, come in from this angle, take out a gas, kill a few SCVs, go in and out, kill a few units, lose a few shields, pull back. Send counterattacks in. Oh, guess what? A warp prism flies into your main, past the missile turret, warps 10 zealots in your main. Maybe I've got DTs coming in. But definitely, if you're not able to actually force good trades there, as stats managers to do in these games, you do end up having to go either to Skytoss or Storm and really kind of adding onto your tech. You can't stay Stalker Colossi forever, because once there's enough Vikings or enough range libs, especially once you add EMP in to deal with the Zealots and Archons, the Terran can absolutely deal with this composition.
Oh, I found a question in the chat. It says, if Maru had more tanks and Widow Mines, or if he had tanks and more Widow Mines, do you think that original push would have been unsuccessful?
So Widow Mines is interesting because Widow Mines are generally really hard to use against Colossi. Basically, the Widow Mines have to sit quite far back, a little bit further back against Colossi, because otherwise they can just kill them from out of range. So it makes it a little bit more awkward to set up. They definitely can still get some decent hits on Zealots when they charge in or Stalkers when they blink in. But they're not really the unit you want because it kind of relies on your opponent headbutting into your scenario. So Widow Mines, as a general rule, are the unit you want to just scrap out of your production as quickly as possible against Colossi. Even though they are good against charge lots, you generally don't want a lot of them. Siege tanks, quite decent versus Stalkers and Colossi. They've got fantastic range. So they're kind of a good stopgap. And this is something I'm going to talk about later in one of the games as well, where there's an interesting thing where you can kind of look at it and you can go, sorry, I'm just going to be opening from replays so we can open these replays up faster, where siege tanks can help you hang on to a nice choke point, right? Because you suddenly have the range advantage, but often Terran is using those siege tanks earlier in their games and losing them and they're bleeding off. But definitely you would not die to this sort of timing if you've got a bunch of siege tanks, a bit of wall in front of them to stop the Zealots jumping on top. You could absolutely defend this sort of timing attack. The question is, though, are siege tanks a good unit in the mid to late game of Protoss vs Terran? And I would argue that they're kind of a piece of shit. They're really good if the Protoss takes a bad fight, but it's so hard to force the Protoss to take that bad fight. So siege tanks are this unit where they're very slow, they're very immobile, they're incredible at defending, but turning that defense into aggression is the key, right? So it's easy to fall into the trap of saying, God damn, Protoss keep breaking me with this attack or this timing or this cheese. I need tanks. I'm going to go a mass tank style. But we're talking about the most flexible high-level players in the world. And these guys are incredible when it comes to just shifting gears. Oh, you're still building tanks? It's like a fourth siege? What the fuck? Oh, I'm going to like fully probe my fourth base and go straight to Tempest Tech, you know. It kind of spends a lot of gas on things which aren't range libs, which aren't ghosts, and which aren't your bio upgrades. So I don't think it's necessarily the wrong call, but there are inherent problems that can crop up if you're a bit too focused on siege tanks, and that's why I don't think we'd usually imagine that as a big thing. Another question from Varen says, what about adding Adepts instead of Zealots with this style? I think Adepts are very nice if you want to go Disruptors. What I've found is there are a few pro players. I believe Zest and Classic both have recently done a few Adept plays against Terran, adding Disruptors in with their Colossi. I love it personally as someone who likes my army to kind of stick together in a ball. They stay in range of the Guardian Shield. They cost 25 gas more than a Zealot. They attack a lot slower. They do a lot less damage, even with Glaives. So in the long run, you're spending a lot more money on your Adepts. And even though it's easier to control them, I would argue that if you're very, very good at the game, Zealots are always going to be better value. We saw Mana. People might argue Mana is not the absolute top tier best Protoss in the world. We saw Mana play fucking sick Charge Lot Disruptor back in Austin. He killed it. He played so well. And the Charge Lots are just so much better for, like, if a triple drop gets in your main and you warp in 8 Zealots just before it unloads, they're going to deal with it. You warp in 8 Adepts, sometimes they can just drop 3 Medivacs and Marauders and stim and kill the Adepts, and you're like, God damn it, this unit's just not good enough, especially against, like, Marauders. So that's why it's the power for both counterattacking your opponent with harder hitting units that can actually fight the Marauders and kill them, and defending drops as well. I think Zealots help make up for the otherwise immobile problems you deal with this style. I personally, like I said, love the Adepts because it works so well with your range damage. You get a little death ball, which is so easy to control. So easy to use force fields with Adepts. But, you know, there used to be a style I learned from Classic, my original Legacy of the Void Protoss vs. Terran. You'd actually use a Void Ray before they gave it the slow decrease when it's overcharged. You'd use that to help zone out drops. Sometimes you'd even get a second Void Ray. And you'd kind of just use Oracles for tagging, and you'd play this super turtly Stalker Colossi into Adepts and Disruptor style. Very cool style. Not something which we see at the moment, because I feel the Terrans are just too good at abusing that immobility. They're too good at defending your Adept counters. Zealot counters create a much bigger problem. So that's my thoughts on the Adept Zealot dichotomy. Now,
that's actually kind of interesting. Can I?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. Get in here,
because I go Disruptor all because my main build in PvT is Disruptor drop, and I've always said for a long time that Adepts are the better thing to go for if you go for Disruptors immediately. But charge outs are better if you go for disruptors as a transition. Because, like you said, charge outs are better as a scaling unit. They deal, they're better at harassing, and they are just in general something that don't fall off in PvT. Like, they're just generally always good. But it's difficult to use them with disruptors because they charge into the army, and then you have to micro the charge outs away, and then you don't want to kill your own charge outs with your disruptors. So that's why I always think that Adepts are better in general. But I liked your point about the defensive aspect of it as well, where charge outs are better defensively than Adepts, which I hadn't really thought about. And like I've been talking to like different players as well, because like I always see Korean Protosses go charge outs with disruptors early, and it makes me go crazy. I convinced Parting to go Adepts early, and he says he likes it. I'm trying to convince Trap to do early Adepts with it as well. He's harder to persuade. But so
I agree. I think that's a really good point.
I haven't seen Classic or Zest though do it. I was wondering where you saw that.
It was one of them. I'm not sure if it was both. It was definitely one of them. Did it at least one game recently, and I was like, ooh. It was in an online cup, so I was like, I can't remember what it was. I was just watching a stream, you know, it was an Oli Mol League or something, and I was like, oh my god, he's going to Depths, and I got excited. But so I think just to kind of dumb down all of that amazing analysis you just said into something, because I had the exact same thing as you, where I love going Adepts. And then I was like, oh, people are going charge lots now? What? And I had the same thing after watching Mana's amazing play versus Special at Austin, where I was like, what are you doing, dude? This isn't going to work. And he made it work. If the game gets messy, the Adepts just aren't as good, right?
It works
is
if
a way
you can
to
get
kind
it
of
scrappy.
Yeah.
But
so
it can also bite your in the ass.
I think a good way, yeah, like if you said if you go straight to disruptors, because you're kind of controlling the game, right? So if you're more dictating the fights, and if you're doing that thing where you're kind of constantly pushing forward and picking away at them with disruptor shots, hands down, I think the Adepts is just the better comp there. But I think as soon as the game devolves into scrappiness, that's better. And the reason I kind of got converted after watching that series and having a long, hard think about disruptors and chargelots was, I said, well, how does someone counter disruptors? Because I feel like disruptors are such a godlike unit, right? And they're so hard to beat. And I was like, well, how do I lose with it? How do I see pros as Terran makes the game scrappy as fuck? And that's like, that's it. That's like how I lose with disruptors is the game gets scrappy and they always get a drop in somewhere where I don't quite have the units, and in the depth warping just can't quite handle it. And I'm like, you know what? Like, I think Zealots does kind of work with this, though it definitely requires higher mechanics, higher control, a bit less room for error than with the Adepts. But I'm like, I get it. And I see why it works. I wouldn't say, it's definitely 100%, oh, this is the right way to play, this is better 100%. But I think that's really cool that, me and you both came from the same school of thought, and where I'm kind of converted, but I haven't really tried it yet. The charge.
I'm not converted yet because I actually go fast Dark Templar on 3 base. And then that also can help with drop defense too, but it also adds some extra power punch for punishing aggressive Terrans as well. Because if they're dropping you, they're not paying attention to their own base as well. So then that's exactly like anytime they're attacking is when I'm sending in DTs into their mineral line as well. So I take a different approach. I got that from canning mostly.
I think that's a really, obviously if one guy understands the balls, I think the can's got a lot of understanding of them. But let's talk about this game real quick. So this game is interesting. For anyone who's just tuned in, by the way, we are analyzing the GSL versus the World set of Stats vs Maru. Now we're going through these games one at a time. And I've got Gemini on call with me. He's the one who I'm talking with mostly, but we've also got a bunch of amazing mods. You guys know who you are. You guys will see them also talking in chat, who are grabbing questions from chat. So please feel free to grab those. And I'm going to take a whole bunch more questions after doing my very quick rundown, because this is a quick, very straightforward game, which I thought was kind of hilarious how Stats lost this one. You know, Gemini was talking just before about, he's like, man, some Koreans are so greedy, they just don't scout for things. It's a great example of that. So this time around, the scout actually gets in there with the Reaper, despite the two adepts staying at home. Exact same build as game one from Stats. If it ain't broken, don't fix it. You know, there's no reason to change it. He comes, he says, "Oh, that's a 2-1-1." Observer gets sniped, and we immediately see a shift in his build. Remember in the last game, what did he spot at this point? So it was the same thing. Third Nexus into double gas. Does he actually cancel this gas this time? For some reason, he didn't take the... Oh, he took the gas a bit faster this game. He went third gas before Nexus. Very slight variation in the build, the faster third gas. But normally what he would do go is Nexus, third, fourth gas, then double Forge and Colossi Bay straight into Colossi production, right? This game, he spots it's a 2-1-1. He says, oh shit, double Medevac Marine could be at my base at 5 minutes 20. Goes for the double Forge still, but makes an adjustment, immediately drops 2 more gateways. Says, I need 5 gateway production, and chrono the shit out of that Immortal after just 2 observers. Normally he goes 3 observers first. So notice he's got the observers kind of spotting for where that drop's coming. Oh, actually he did go still 3 observers because he lost 1. But still chrono boosts the Immortal, lots of urgency on that, makes more Stalkers, makes more Adepts. Those 2 gateways are about to finish, comes down and breaks down the rocks, hoping he can buy some time, and he's looking for it, and he's like, it should be here! It should be here! Where is it? And Maru's like, yeah, your observer scouted my 2-1-1, I'm just gonna sit at home, because I know you're going to make units and respect it. And Maru's just chilling, and Stats is having a friggin' panic attack right now, because in his mind, he's like, man, these 2 Medevacs are going to boost through here, or they're going to boost through the very north of the map into the back of my natural, and he's like, he's searching in every single angle, and he's trying to figure out what's happened. And he does still try to squeeze in 1-1 upgrades, and then goes straight up to 8 gateways. He says, look, there could be a really powerful two-base push that comes off this, but you know what? He hasn't pushed yet. So I think I can afford to power. I'm not gonna produce non-stop. Yeah, I make a second Immortal, but otherwise we'll get those gateways down. Let's do that. And you know what? My Stalkers will move across. He clearly hasn't pressed across. Rather than sending an observer across the map, which he really should have done, he sends his Stalkers around, and because he's broken these rocks, they go around the north. He misses Maru moving out, just barely. And he's like, all right, let's get ready to have a poke. Let's, you know, have a bit of a scout with these Stalkers. Oh, there's a couple of units there. Hey! Oh shit, Maru's on my side of the map. Ah, crap. I really need these Stalkers picking away at those units from the moment they move out of the base. Because at home, I've got a few Zealots and a couple of Immortals, which is not enough to deal with this. Even if the Stalkers were picking away at these units as soon as they moved out, this is a tough push to handle. Especially on a small map like Dreamcatcher. And that's why, yeah, I mean, this map is awkward with these paths through the middle and stuff, but I definitely think he needed to send one of those observers across the map, use an Adept to plug this hole or something like that. Felt like Stats really got thrown through a loop after the 2-1-1 didn't move across at the expected timing, and then he just was kind of thrown. He was like, oh, shit. Oh, no. And you can tell he just kind of felt the urgency to get to the other side, so he sent his Stalkers around without having any vision of the exit of Maru's base, any vision of a drop moving out, and I think that was the crucial mistake in this game. But it was cool to see that he had an inbuilt response, which was, I don't need Colossi yet, just add Immortals, charge, and tons of extra gateways as quickly as possible. Anything to add, Gemini?
Not really. I mean, yeah, I just think his positioning with his vision was a little flawed, like you said, after he lost the forward observer. Like, if you lose a forward observer after you scout something and it gets scanned, you either have to send out another forward observer or send something out there to see the front of the ramp as early as possible. Either a probe,
even a little Probius, yeah.
Yeah, and this is something that I tell a lot of people as well, that pro players don't do because they're greedy and they want all their probes mining. But it's not bad if you have no other way to scout something. Just send a probe. Just put a probe on patrol outside the natural. A lot of the times in low leagues, especially, the things that you're scouting, like, it's not super necessary to see the specifics of what they're making. You just have to see when they're coming at you, and then you know to be defensive. So if you just hold a probe out there, and you just see when they go across the map, that's as much information as a lot of times that you need, and it's something that is not detrimental to your economy, like would be to pro players. Or at least they
Absolutely.
think it is.
I mean, even if it's a single stalker or an adept, like you'd lose the adept. The stalker could blink out a dodge when he moves out, but a probe would have seen this. These stalkers would have rotated back. It started intercepting this and harassing it in the center of the map. And that's important because any stims you can bait out, any units you can pick off, which you can. Your units are way more nimble than the Terran units with Blink. You're going to pick off a few units. You're going to waste a stim or two. This really hurts the longevity of this push. And it also allows you to know it's coming and be like, hey, why am I building probes right now? Stop building probes. Make as much stuff as I can. So in hindsight, why is this push so hard to stop, guys? Look at Maru's setup. What does Maru have? 2 bases of workers, 3 barracks, a factory, a starport. Maru only has a single engineering bay. Doesn't have a 3rd command center, doesn't have a 4th gas or a 2nd engineering bay. You know, this is very bare bones in terms of Maru's setup for tech and further economy. He can produce a very nice 2-base army, and if that doesn't get anything done, he can produce another 2-base army. And then 5 minutes later, he can actually have a 3-base economy. This is a big commitment from Maru. Needed to be respected. Stats going for double upgrades was huge. Now, you might look at this and say, but stats stopped at just 45 probes or 48, 50 probes. It's only a few probes more than Terran. Shouldn't Protoss be allowed to get more probes because of mules? This comes down to the question of the scales and understanding who's ahead and who's behind in the game, right? There's scales in a match of StarCraft of where you put your money. So the most important is economy versus economy. In this case, Maru actually had a larger economy in terms of actual live income on those 2 bases and then stats because he simply had mules on top of the equal worker count, right? So economy was very similar, but then you're like, well, but there's a 3rd nexus. So over time, Stats is going to have his workers spread more and every extra worker he builds is going to be way more effective. Sorry, guys, I forgot to turn off my double alerts. My bad. That's fixed. Thank you very much, Landcow, for the Twitch Prime sub. So basically what's happened here is Stats is roughly even on economy, but he's gone for an extra upgrade, which is very big. Boom, 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 boom. Double upgrades verse 1. And Blink, and Charge, and Immortals against a very basic Marine Marauder Mine army. I would argue that the better army here is the Protoss army. It's definitely got better upgrades and better tech, and I think he probably could have barely hung on here, but he needed to be on top of this. He needed to like play it very, very carefully in the defense. He needed to pick away at this push and kind of continue from there. So guys, thank you very much for hanging out. Appreciate that, Landcow. And yeah, we can kind of get into some questions and stuff. We'll watch this game from Maru's view for a minute or two. Any good questions that people are asking?
I actually saw one earlier. If I can go ahead and take over the mod's position.
Yeah.
And just go ahead and answer a question. But
yeah, sure.
There was someone asking just how to actually go into Colossus, like how to transition into them, because obviously you're not opening straight into 2-base Colossus or anything. It's like Blink into eventual Colossus. And he says like, how do you hold off attacks while you're going into them? What do you prioritize during the transition? Blah blah blah. And I think this was important to talk about in the first replay as well, because something that we see with a lot of lower league players is that they struggle defending against drops while they're going into like a different tech or something, or while they're building up the Colossus count, right? Like they'll have a Colossus or 2, they get a big Doom drop in their main, they suddenly fall apart, and they're like, oh shit, this composition's awful, I can't deal with drops. You know, something like that. So we also talked about, or you talked about how he had that ring of observers set up early on as well to defend the drop. And I think it's important to talk about why that allows us to very easily defend things, because it allows us to split up our units. So when we're going for these Colossus attacks, or sorry, these Colossus builds, we need to make sure that we have enough vision to allow the immobility, or to allow us to not get abused because of our immobility. So the more vision we have on the map, the more it allows us to spread our units out. This is actually something I was talking to one of my students about today, where if you have no vision on the map, you have no justification to send units to your main to prepare for a drop. If you have vision on the map, then you can know that you're not being attacked immediately down the front, and you're then justified to send off a portion of your army to defend against drops prematurely. And this is something that Stats had, and that's something that Stats did. He had vision all around the map. He knew exactly where Maru's main army was, and he was able to then split his army up to defend the drop that was incoming. And something that a lot of lower league players will do, they will either keep their army clumped up together in one spot and then complain about the drops, or they'll send stuff off to hopefully defend against a would-be drop, and then something attacks them where their army is not fully together, and then they get frustrated by that. So it's important to focus on vision as a way to set up this transition to Colossus, and it's something that's extremely important because of the fact that it is an immobile army initially, that it requires some time to actually get everything together and get a well-rounded composition. Like you were saying, when you have just like a sentry, a couple stalkers, and one Colossus, that's not really a good army. When you have 3 Colossus, a couple sentries, a bunch of stalkers, and charge slots, that's a big army. So when you're trying to get up to that army, it's important to focus on vision to allow yourself to then allocate your defenses properly against an incoming Terran player.
Adapt says Pig is getting pissed. No, I'm not. I am soaking up the amazing knowledge because Gemini is saying things very clearly, and I would actually only do one thing there, which I would say I agree with everything you said, but I think the easier way for it to be understood just for a newer player, since that's like really what we're getting at with this point, right? It's very much a newer player sort of thing, is you have the vision so you can keep your army together. Usually, like you said, so you can split your army up, and I know it's the same thing, I'm getting semantic, but just for people who are newer to the game, it's so you can keep your army together, right? Most of the time. So like usually you'll have like the observer outside their base, and you'll see they move out, and you're like, cool, my army's here, and it's in position, it's all together. But then you see like, oh, there's a drop going that way. All right, I'm going to like either split my army up or I'll warp in a bunch of stalkers and we'll leave them there. If we're super advanced, we'll put them on a different control group. But the default is like, unless we see drops and stuff, like we're not going to just split our army in 1/3 in the main, 1/3 in the third, 1/3 in the natural, and their whole army pushes and engages 1/3 of our army and we die and we're like, Rah! But absolutely, you know what? It's the same thing Gemini was saying before about probes out on the map. It's so important to have that map vision. It's so friggin' awesome. And this is what I always talk about. People say, how do I scout? What do I mean, my opponent went for a starport and he went for this. What does that mean? And I always go, nah, I don't care. Until you're in like platinum, at least the top of platinum, don't care. Map control is the first step for all races, you know? See when they move out. Try to see when they're pushing you so that you're not surprised by it. And then you can prepare. But really good question there. Mods, was there another question in there? Who's got one?
Bulya asked, in the first game, stats stopped at 2/2 upgrades and didn't get any more. Was that because he knew he could